أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لما تقولون ما لا تفعلون كبر مقتا عند الله أن تقولوا ما لا تفعلون. إن الله يحب الذين يقاتلون في سبيله صفا كأنهم بنيان مرصوص. وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم لم تؤذونني وقد تعلمون أني رسول الله إليكم فلما زاغوا أزاغ الله قلوبهم والله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. وإذ قال عيسى ابن مريم يا بني إسرائيل إني رسول الله إليكم مصدقا لما بين يدي من التوراة ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعد اسمه أحمد. فلما جاءهم بالبينات قالوا هذا سحر مبين. ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله الكذب وهو يدعى إلى الإسلام والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا هل أدلكم على تجارة تنجيكم من عذاب أليم تؤمنون بالله ورسوله وتجاهدون في سبيل الله بأموالكم وأنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. يغفر لكم ذنوبكم ويدخلكم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ومساكن طيبة في جنات عدن ذلك الفوز العظيم. وأخرى تحبونها نصر من الله وفتح قريب وبشر المؤمنين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا أنصار الله كما قال عيسى ابن مريم للحواريين من أنصاري إلى الله قال الحواريون نحن أنصار الله فآمنت طائفة من بني إسرائيل وكفرت طائفة فأيدنا الذين آمنوا على عدوهم فأصبحوا ظاهرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة صلى الله عليه وآله يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا وجيها لنا عند الله يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها القاسم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا جهاد عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزقي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا مولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا اشفع لنا عند الله يا وصي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا عند الله وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله طلب حاجات يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وأدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوب عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين الله
ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، چلی ہے مانگنے حق فاطمہ رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، رسول زادی کھری کیوں رہی سرے دربار، رسول زادی کھری کیوں رہی سرے دربار، یہ کون تخت پہ بیٹھا رہا رسول کے بعد، چلی ہے مانگنے حق فاطمہ رسول کے بعد، ستم کی ہو گئی یہ انتہا رسول کے بعد، وہ جا کے شہر کے باہر پدر کو روتی رہی، وہ جا کے شہر کے باہر پدر کو روتی رہی، کسی نے گھر میں نہ رونے دیا رسول کے بعد، کسی نے گھر میں نہ رونے دیا رسول کے بعد، شہید ہو گیا اس کی ہی ضرب سے محسن، شہید ہو گیا اس کی ہی ضرب سے محسن، در بطول گرایا گیا رسول کے بعد، در بطول گرایا گیا رسول کے بعد، وہ جرم کیا تھا کہ جس پر علی کو گلیوں میں، وہ جرم کیا تھا کہ جس پر علی کو گلیوں میں رسن کے باندھ کے کھینچا گیا رسول کے بعد، رسن کے باندھ کے کھینچا گیا رسول کے بعد، شکست ہو گیا کیسے بطول کا پہلو، شکست ہو گیا کیسے بطول کا پہلو، بتاؤ ظلم یہ کس نے کیا رسول کے بعد، بتاؤ ظلم یہ کس نے کیا رسول کے بعد، کوئی بتائے ہمیں کیوں بطول کے گھر سے، کوئی بتائے ہمیں کیوں بطول کے گھر سے، हमें शरों ने की आई सदा रसूल के बाद, हमें शरों ने की आई सदा रसूल के बाद। चली है मांगने हक फातिमा रसूल के बाद, सितम की हो गई ये इंतहा रसूल के बाद, सितम की हो गई ये इंतहा रसूल के बाद। पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sayyid Hasan Rizvi, respected elders, brothers, sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for all the names listed on the screen and Kul Arwah al-Mu'mineen wal-Mu'minat, Sawab al-Fatiha. Ayat-e Mayyajibun is requested for all the names listed on the screen and whoever is in need of it here and elsewhere. Let us all recite it together. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Alhamdulillah, with our Muharram Safar budget, we're getting close to our target. We are only about 10% left. Please, within the next couple of nights, if you can make whatever contribution you can for us to close this circle, would be greatly appreciated. You can see Brother Abbas Salu or Sultan Yusuf Ali in the gents side, or Sister Fatima Abdul Hussein in the ladies side to make a contribution. Or you can also use the QR code shown on the screen to make your donation. The Salat workshop registration has been extended till October 8th, till Thursday, October 8th. There's very limited spaces remaining, so please, if you haven't done your registration and would like to do so, please visit the link on the screen, or we have also sent out a WhatsApp earlier today to make your registration. There's been a good number of turnout. If any parent is in need of babysitting, there will be free babysitting service provided. Slots are limited, so please email info@cbefl.org with your child's name and age if interested. Now let us invite Sayyid to come forward to recite tonight's majlis by Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بعد الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا والنبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين المكرمين الخيرين الفاضلين السيدين الصادقين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين روحي وأرواح العالمين لتراب مقدمه الفدا ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد صلوات على محمد وآل محمد مؤمنين مؤمنات brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman Salamun alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight on this 28th of Safar we are commemorating the death anniversary of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad al-Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa You know, when we talk about his personality, it's easy for us to get lost in the greatness and the grandness of his name, of his status, of his maqam, right? As it should be. You know, when we look at the titles that he's been given and how he's addressed, right? He's, in one sense, Insanul Kamil, right? The perfect human being. When you extend the scope even beyond that, right? He's Rahma lil Alameen, right? He's this mercy sent for all living, intelligent creatures. In the Sufi Irfani circles, he's known as this bridge, this breath, the divine breath that sits between infinite perfection of Allah and the imperfection or the finiteness of the dunya. And he is that Khalifa that sits in between and acts as our wasila. So we know him through the changes that he brought forward during his time 1400 years ago. And we talk about this, right? Not just Muslims, but academics, historians, they talk about this grand transformation that he brought to the Arab civilization of that time. He changed society. He changed these people. He completely transformed that culture that was existing then. And sometimes what happens is when we think about all this, which is obviously true, he did all that. And he was more successful, or he achieved the success that no other personality in history has ever been able to do. You don't have any other person, not even any other prophet, who's been able to transform an entire civilization in that manner. It hasn't happened in history ever. So yes, it's true. What we end up doing too is when we take examples and we look at his life, we take that idea of his large-scale success and we want to follow suit. It's like, okay, he completely transformed all of civilization, all of society. We want to make these large-scale changes too. So when we start going out and getting involved in projects, we start thinking in these grand scales too, right? In a sort of macro level. We want to go and completely eradicate poverty. We want to explain to all of humanity the message of Islam or the message of Imam Hussein or things like that. Right? We start thinking in these huge, huge manners. Sometimes what we end up forgetting, though, is that one of the main factors of his success, of Rasulullah's success, is not that he was, again, creating this large-scale change overnight like this. This change came about because he was going and performing one-on-one transformation, right? Going to individuals, changing their lives, and because of those individual changes, one individual, because their life changed, because they made these, snap decisions, because of those decisions, they had reverberations and effects that completely changed society. So sometimes we end up, our mindset is thinking about these large, grand scale things, when if we were to follow the actual model of Rasulullah, we would think more about the individual effects, right? The small ideas, the small changes that took place. And this is actually what led to the extreme societal, cultural, or civilizational change. So that's what I wanted to go to and analyze and examine tonight. And I want to do so through one very famous story, or maybe not so famous, maybe we haven't heard before. So we're going to go through the story, inshallah, and then we'll try to extrapolate some points from there in the next 20 minutes or so. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So there were these two individuals, right? The story is about these two individuals who lived during the Prophet's time. Right? This is the Medinan phase. And it's these two individuals who ended up becoming husband and wife, named Juwaibir and Dhalfa. So it's not, when I grew up, I never actually heard the story myself, right? So it's in history books, it's in the hadith books, but I myself don't recall hearing it growing up. Maybe some of you may have heard it in a lecture, but it's a story that's there, but it's maybe not super famous. Anyway, this first personality, Juwaibir. So he was somebody of a Sudanese background. He was originally from Yamama, right? Yamama was the Najd region of Hijaz, right? Of Saudi. So he was one of those types, those individuals who, right? There were some people who were in Mecca or in Medina while the message of Islam was being, transmitted by Rasulullah. So they heard it, they were there, it was convenient, so they accepted it, and they were part of the Islamic empire at that point, right? They were just there. Other individuals had a lot more struggle, right? You had people traveling from Yemen or coming from far off other lands because they heard about Islam. They heard about the personality of Rasulullah, and they said, we have to find out first person, right? We have to get a first-hand account of who this guy is and what he's talking about, right? That's how powerful the message had reached everybody. So in this area, over outside, right here in Yamama, right, this kind of outer area of Hijaz, some people had traveled and wanted to see what was going on in Medina. So he was one of these individuals, right? So he wasn't somebody of wealth or of status, of stature, of anything like that, right? Just some random, person of Sudanese background, some random African who happened to be in Hijaz, right, in the outskirts. He heard what was going on. He made the trek and traveled to Medina to hear. When he heard and met Rasulullah, obviously he accepted Islam. Now, coming from his background, he became part of what was known as the Ashab al-Suffa. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Ashab al-Suffa. So the Ashab al-Suffa, when Islam was first established in Medina, when the Muhajirun came, you had the Ansar that were already there. There were some people who had established their livelihood, right? They had homes there. Even if they were poor, they had some living conditions there. Maybe they had some sort of income. They had family. They had their tribes there. People like Juwaibir, they left everything. They didn't have anybody, right? They were all alone. They traveled just to come and accept Islam. And there are many who are like this. In the beginning, it was only a handful, but later on, it became, tens and then hundreds. There were a lot of individuals who left everything behind. They traveled, they migrated from outside, right? From the outskirts of the sort of Arabian Peninsula. They came, became Muslims, and they needed a place to stay. They needed to be taken care of. So in the beginning, in Medina, one part of Masjid al-Nabawi, Masjid al-Nabi, was this part called the Sufa, or meant for the people of Sufa. And this is where anybody, if you didn't have a home, this is where you stayed. So the companions, the Ansar, Rasulullah would come, they would drop off food for them, they would bring money for them, right? They would take care of them because they didn't have anything else at that point. And then there's a whole history and discussion about their personality, what happened later. That's not our concern. But the whole point is that this is a poor guy who's coming in. He doesn't have anything, right? So he's just living pretty much in the masjid at this point. Yeah, in the future, basically, after the Qibla changes and kind of as we advance in the future of Islam, then Allah had decreed that people should not be living and staying in the masjid. So then a small area outside of Masjid al-Nabi was created, and that's where they began to stay. So again, you can call this a shelter, homeless shelter, whatever you want, right? That's where they were staying and they were being taken care of. So, of course, Rasulullah would frequent this place. He would go and meet with these people, these Ashab al-Suffa, the people who were, weren't so well-to-do. He would go there, he would teach them, he would recite Quran with them, he would pray with them, he would bring them food, he would sit down and connect with them. And he knew Juwaibir very well, right? He was a person of, he didn't have money. He didn't have status or anything like that. But he was strong in his iman. He was a very good Muslim. He was devoted to the cause. So he had a strong relationship with Rasulullah as well. And Rasulullah looked after him. So one time, Rasulullah comes to him and gives him some advice. He says, it would be really awesome. It'd be beautiful. It'd be great for you if you could, get married, establish a family, have a nice home, right? This is going to be good for your dunya and for your akhirah, right? It'll take care of your life. That's what you need. You need to start progressing and move along with your life, right? It's kind of like sounding like a father or an uncle or like an auntie in the community, right? Like, when are you going to get married and have kids? Like, that's what Rasulullah was doing for this guy. He said, you need to take care of this. So, the person responds. He's like, Ya Rasulullah, look, he's like, I don't have any money. He's like, I'm not good looking. He's like, very in the hadith, he says, I'm ugly. He's like, I'm short. I don't come from a good tribe. I don't have a noble lineage. He's like, I don't know what woman in this area is going to marry some poor, short, black, ugly person like me. That's literally what he says in the hadith. He's like, I don't know who's going to marry me. I don't know what you're saying. This is not going to work out. Rasulullah responds to him. He's like, Ya Juwaibir, Allah, by means of Islam, has removed those who were called noble, originally those in the beginning. They were noble, they were the dignified ones in the Jahiliyyah pre-Islamic times. In the age of ignorance, they were the best of the best. Everybody loved them. They were the elites. Then Islam came and they became dishonored. And their status was lowered because Islam didn't see their traits as being valuable. And vice versa. On the other side, all of those individuals who had no social position whatsoever, no dignity, no honor, nothing, because of their traits that Islam looked for, they became noble in the eyes of Allah. Their status became raised up. So he's like, things got flipped around when Islam came. That pride of the time of ignorance, of Jahiliyyah, and people expressing pride because of their tribes and their genealogy, he's like, that's done with. That's not here anymore. He's like, today, what we say as Muslims is that all people, white or black, whether you're Qurayshi or not, whether you're Arab or non-Arab, everyone is from Adam, right? Alayhi salam. And Adam created Allah from dirt, from clay. And the most beloved in the sight of Allah on the Day of Judgment is those who do the most ita'at and are the most obedience to Allah. And those who have the most taqwa, those who obey Allah and are the most pious. Juwaibir, listen. I don't see any Muslims as better than you unless they have more taqwa than you or they're more obedient to Allah than you. He's like, that's the scale that we should be using over here. He said, Juwaibir, listen, let me give you some advice. Let me tell you what to do. There's this other individual named Ziyad ibn Labid. He's somebody who's very honorable. He's from the tribe of Bayada. And because of his social status, you should go to him and tell him, say, look, tell him that I am a messenger from Rasulullah and I've got a message for you. My message is that Rasulullah has said that you have to marry your daughter Dhalfa to me, right? So again, the whole point is that Rasulullah is telling him to get married. Juwaibir is saying, nobody's going to get married to me. I'm short, I'm poor, I'm ugly. It's not going to work out. Rasulullah is saying, look, all those other things, those are all traits from Jahiliyyah. Those are gone. He sent him to Ziyad ibn Labid. He said, go to him. He's a good person. He's a good Muslim. Tell him that Rasulullah has ordered him to give his daughter Dhalfa, told him to marry you. It's like, that's what it is. And again, Juwaibir is a little hesitant, but he's like, look, Rasulullah is ordering me. Fine, I'll go. All right, let me send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Okay. So here are the two main characters, right? Juwaibir, this guy, and then this daughter of Ziyad named Dhalfa. So now Juwaibir goes to the house, right? He knocks on the door and he asks for permission. He said, I've been sent from Rasulullah. He said, yeah, come on in. Ziyad welcomes him. At that point, Ziyad, like many people do, right? If you have a lot of wealth and status, he's in his house, he's chilling, his family's there, his tribesmen are there. They're all hanging out, right? Enjoying, having a good time. So, they exchange salams, right? Nice greetings. And he says, what can I do for you, Juwaibir? He says, look, Rasulullah has sent me with a message that I have to give to you. Do you want me to tell it to you in private, or do you want me to tell it to you, in public, in front of everybody? He's like, look, if you're bringing a message, Ziyad says, if you're bringing a message from me, from Rasulullah, he's like, I'm honored that Rasulullah is sending something to me. Definitely you can say it in front of everybody, right? It's an honor for me. Maybe he would regret this, right? As you'll see in a second. So he says, well, Rasulullah said that you have to marry your daughter Dhalfa to me. So Ziyad's like, okay. He's like, you're telling me Rasulullah told you, he's looking at him up and down, that I should marry my daughter, Dhalfa, to you. He's like, yeah, that's what Rasulullah said. It's like, okay. He's like, Rasulullah made this up on his own or you gave him the idea? He's like, no, no, no. I'm not a liar. You know that. This is from Rasulullah's words. It's like, okay. He's like, look, man. We didn't say it like that. I'm paraphrasing, right? Look, our tribe, we marry people from the Ansar. You know, people from the same social status. That's just how we've been doing things, right? You know what? Why don't you, you go back to Rasulullah, and, whenever I get a chance, I'll go talk to Rasulullah, and I'll see, I'll clear up all the misconceptions. Maybe there's some miscommunication, something went wrong. I'll figure it out. Don't worry. So, see you later. So, I think you could imagine that this is how the story was going to go. So as Juwaibir, right, this is the idea he had in his mind. He thought this was going to happen. So as he's walking out, he starts mumbling to himself, right? Sometimes something like this happens. You say stuff under your breath, but you don't really say it under your breath. You say it to yourself, but say it loud enough for people to hear. So he's running outside like, ugh. He's like, look, all these guys claim to be following the Quran and they're Muslims, they're following Allah. He's like, what kind of nonsense is this? He's like, this is not Islam and this is not what these people are following. So he's saying all this out loud as he's kind of walking out of Ziyad's house. So Ziyad's daughter Dhalfa happens to hear from her room. So she hears all this as Juwaibir now is like leaving the house and he's running out. So Dhalfa sends for her father. So her father comes to the room. He's like, yeah, what happened? He's like, okay. What just happened over there? I heard this guy leaving, and she knew him, Juwaibir. He's like, I heard this person leaving and mumbling this stuff. What just took place? He said, well, he claimed that Rasulullah sent him to get married to you, that I have to marry you off to him. So obviously I told him that's not going to work out. We're, a nice tribe. We got a good social status. It doesn't make sense. That's not how we do things. And she said, are you telling me that this person who's never lied in his life, you are not sure if he brought a message from Rasulullah or not? You know that he doesn't lie. He brought a command from Rasulullah and you just rejected him? Like, you know what you need to do, right? He's like, what should I do? Right? This is a daughter telling her father, you need to send your servant to go back, grab him, and bring him back to the house. And you need to show him much more respect than you showed him. Like, you disrespected him. He's like, yeah, okay, fine. So they send somebody out. They grab Juwaibir on the way. Said, look, sorry, we didn't treat you the right way. Come back to the house. As he comes back, Ziyad apologizes. He's like, look, I'm really sorry. Just sit here. Let me go. While you sit here, you'll get entertained. Let me go talk to Rasulullah right now, right? I'm not going to delay this. So now Ziyad goes himself to Rasulullah. And he clarifies it. Rasulullah said, yeah, that's what I told him to do. I sent him there to get married to your daughter. He said, okay. He's like, but Rasulullah, he says the same thing. We are from, a very famous tribe. We have a certain social status. It's just not going to work well. There's no chemistry. It's just not going to work. And then, of course, the same sort of speech that you can expect. Rasulullah is telling him, like, look, that's not what Islam is about. Islam has set up that if you've got a Muslim, they are suitable for any Muslimah. That's the way it works. If they're a mu'min, then a mu'minah is suitable for them. We are looking at spiritual qualities. We're not looking at social status anymore. We're not looking at your wealth. We're not looking at your tribe and your lineage. These things are done and they're dead, and you need to throw these things out. He said, okay, if that's what you are ordering me to do, even though I don't like it, I'm going to do it. Fine, if that's what you're telling me to do. So he goes back. Again, he apologizes to Juwaibir. He says, okay, that's the case. My daughter's ordered me that I need to do this as well and follow Rasulullah. So then he says, you know what? Okay. So right away, they recite the marriage. He asks him, he's like, look, I know your status. I know that you can't give a meher. I'll give the meher on your behalf. Did somebody say, uh-huh? Yeah, it's really crazy now, right? So he says, look, I'll give the meher on your behalf, no problem. Then he asks him, he's like, look, do you have a house to take my daughter to? He's like, I don't. I'm staying outside the masjid. I don't have anything. Like, no problem. He buys him a house. He's like, okay, I know that you can't afford anything else either. He completely furnishes the house too. Every single thing that's needed, he takes care of on his own. He goes above and beyond, right? Does every single thing possible. And then finally, after all is said and done, they get married, they move into the house, and I don't want to say happily ever after, there's more to the story, but it's not exactly relevant, so I'll leave the other parts maybe for another discussion. So let's pause there, inshallah, and then we'll go from and analyze this story. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, I'm going to quickly summarize again in case you got lost with the details. Short, ugly, black guy comes, says, Rasulullah said, I have to marry your daughter. Guy says, we don't do those things. Goes to his daughter is like, what's wrong with you? We're Muslims now. Why wouldn't you obey Rasulullah? He goes, Rasulullah says, what's wrong with you? Comes back, marries his daughter off, gives the meher, buys a house for them, furnishes it, jahiz, like all that stuff, right? So he fixes his mistake, basically. Okay. So now, the lessons here. If I were to ask you in this whole story, where was the first mistake? What was the first mistake that was made in the story? Where would you say it was? I know you guys are not going to say it out loud because you guys are not really an interactive type. Most of you are going to think that I'm going to focus on Ziyad's refusal, right? The fact that he said no and that he got a little racist or whatever. So I'm not going to talk about racism at all. The topic is done with, it's dead, it's cliche. I'm tired of hearing the topic. I don't even think it's that big of an issue, so we're not even going to talk about that at all. I don't actually think that was the issue in the first place anyway, but khair. So no, Ziyad, the father, he actually wasn't the first person to make a mistake in the story. The first person to make a mistake was Juwaibir. Like, what? This poor guy, what are you talking about? Well, how did he make a mistake? His mistake was this. In the beginning, Rasulullah gave him an advice, or rather gave him an order. He pretty much refused Rasulullah's advice in the first place. He was the one who said, no, because of my status, because of XYZ, because of who I am, nobody's going to marry me. His first issue, the first issue in this story, the first negative spiritual characteristic was the negative and pessimistic outlook of Juwaibir. This is actually the first negative in the story. The fact that Juwaibir didn't have high hopes and a positive outlook of his Muslim brothers and sisters was actually the first part, the negative part of this story. We have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's reported to have said, خَصْلَتَانْ لَا تَجْتَمِعَانْ فِي الْمُؤْمِنِ. There are two things that you will never find in a mu'min, two qualities. One is al-bukhl, meaning you won't find a mu'min ever being stingy. And the second is وَسُوءُ الظَّنِّ بِرِزْقٍ. You will never find a mu'min having this negative assumption or pessimism in terms of their rizq. They'll always be positive in that sense. Marriage is a part of rizq as well. Juwaibir had this negative assumption. He said, look, nobody's going to marry me. When we have this negative assumption about our fellow brothers and sisters, our fellow mu'mineen, mu'minat, muslimin, muslimat, we think that it's a distrust or a lack of faith in people, but it's actually not that. It goes beyond that. When we don't feel like people are going to practice the Islam properly, right? That's why we're so negative. Like, this guy's not going to follow, he's not going to listen, he's not a good Muslim, whatever it is. We're not just being negative towards that specific individual. What we're really saying is that Islam and the message of the Ahlul Bayt is so weak that it actually hasn't penetrated the hearts of people. That's why people are not going to follow it. Or you take it another level higher, what you're really saying or really thinking is that Allah's message, na'udhu billah, is so weak, such a waste of time, that it's actually not going to affect the general public. So what's the point? Why would I, because what you're really doing is thinking Allah's message is useless, it doesn't have an effect. Rasulullah didn't have an effect. The Ahlul Bayt doesn't have an effect. Majalis of Ahlul Bayt don't have an effect. So I'm not going to have trust in people. And this is what happened to Juwaibir. He didn't trust Rasulullah's teachings and his message. That's why he thought, these Muslims didn't believe in Islam. And if you see, that's what he was mumbling and groaning as he was leaving too. So you might say, yeah, wasn't he proven correct? Regardless of that fact, it's not right for a mu'min to have that in his mind in the first place. And that's something that we see, we have to make sure that we're rooting that out within ourselves too. If we are going to try to strive for growth in our community, it's not going to happen as long as we are assuming the worst for each other. As long as we are assuming that there's not going to be any growth, the youth are never going to come back, the elders are never going to change their ways, this thing will never work, this, we're just going to assume that, we are doing nothing but creating that reality. Just like what happened with Juwaibir. In a sense, in the beginning, he pretty much created that reality. He thought it was going to come out negatively, and it did. And we could possibly say that it was his fault for thinking like that in the first place. Maybe we might say, if he had that positive outlook, that might have changed certain, things cause and effect wise, and the story may have turned out a different way. We don't know, but khair. Our job if we're trying to be mu'mineen at least, is to make sure we are keeping positive outlooks for everything, especially when it comes out to, and it comes into, when it comes to the rizq that Allah allots to all of us. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So that was the first. Juwaibir was negative, shouldn't have done that. Okay. Let's go to the second part. Now we can jump to Ziyad. All right. He made a mistake too. He refused. He shouldn't have done that, right? That's a clear mistake. So what's the issue here? So it's interesting. Rasulullah had sent Juwaibir specifically to this guy Ziyad ibn Labid. Rasulullah knew who he was. Didn't Rasulullah know that there's a possibility this guy was going to be tribalistic or whatever in nature, or a socialist or a classist in nature? Or acting like, with this Jahiliyyah background? Like, didn't he know that? That's something to think about. Sometimes we might have Islamic beliefs. We might be Muslims in that sense, right? I believe in the Shahadatain and the Quran and Allah and all that stuff. Yeah, we have all that. The problem for most of us is not about believing in those things. The problem is that we grab all this extra baggage from somewhere else, right? Maybe it's from the East where we grew up, Eastern culture, right? Indian, Pakistani, Desi, African culture, whatever it is. We grab that and we hold on to that and we refuse to let go. So now as we step into the folds of Islam and try to practice our Islam as much as possible, we say that we'll do all that stuff, fine. But when it interferes with our cultural background and our beliefs from back home, no. That's not going to work out. It's not like Ziyad, didn't know this stuff. He was there with Rasulullah. He was one of the best companions. But still, something was within him. There was a block within him, a spiritual block, that made him hold on to his previous Jahiliyyah ways, his tribal ways, his cultural ways. And for a lot of us, that happens too. And it happens in two different ways. Again, the cliche answer is, Easterners, those who have emigrated over here from Africa, from India, from Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, wherever. You older people, stop holding on to your culture. We have to be religious, not cultural. All that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's there. We know that, and hopefully we can start to move away and understand that. Look, Islam has its own set of recommendations for things, and sometimes the way that we want to do something may be antithetical to what Islam wants. We may want to do stuff and run programs a certain way, right? Or to try to grow the community a certain way, and it might be completely opposite to what Islam says. We have to really re-examine the things that, we establish in our communities, in our centers, in our homes. We have to think about it, right? Like, does it occur in our minds that, is this what Islam is actually pushing towards or not? I mean, for him, as a Muslim, Ziyad was thinking, yeah, this is fine. What's wrong with me saying that, but we can say with chemistry, right? Yeah, they should be from the same social class. They should be from the same tribe. What's wrong with that? The same tribe. But no, that was a big issue. We shouldn't have done that. It wouldn't have made the marriage haram either. This is a mustahab thing, but there's a certain Islamic culture that Rasulullah was trying to get across, that this person was failing at. So he had a high level of hopes and objectives for the Muslim ummah. And we have to have that same thing for ourselves as well. Re-examining all the different parts of our life as we, organize programs and run things at home and engage with our children, really figure out which of these things are kind of our own creation. Are we just grabbing from, again, leftover back home, which if we're saying they're back home, it's either going to come from a Indian, Pakistani, whatever, Desi background. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it's part of African culture for you guys, right? Or the third possibility is that it's none of those. It's actually sourced from, it's leftover British colonial imperial culture. You guys have colonized mindsets. What can I say? So a lot of that stuff when it comes to education, when it comes to gender roles, when it comes to how, organizations or businesses or things should be run, it's not coming from Islam. It's coming from those leftover, from the crown, from Her Majesty. She was calling the shots for a while. And what she wanted was a certain type of subservient, obedient person to the crown. And a lot of those cultural ideas filtered in Pakistan, India, all the way to Africa, and it's still in our communities to this day. A lot of the times, even as we get to the next point, with tarbiyah, as far as tarbiyah is concerned, a lot of the ways that people try to raise their children right now is from completely outdated systems of education, have nothing to do with Islamic tarbiyah, right? We have to discipline, we have to be focused, we have to, make sure kids follow exactly what we're saying, right? That very militaristic, strict, disciplinary style. Yeah, that's what the British want. That's what military brats want. You want obedient children. But Islam says no. The first 7 years, open, free, play, creative thinking, right? This is the idea there. So it's completely antithetical to what Islam says, right? If we're establishing those old means. And people always ask me, why have we lost the youth? Well, maybe because they were so constricted for those first few years, or not the first few years, pretty much their whole lives. The first thing they're going to do when they get a little bit of freedom, when they get a car or they go off to college, is of course they're going to go and engage in everything else that you have been telling and advising them not to do, but never giving the reasons, or forcing them not to do without telling them why, or restricting their belief system, or restricting their actions. Of course, they're going to go and try to live their life and enjoy, because everybody else around us is enjoying their lives and they're having a nice, happy life. It's just us who are sad all the time, right? 360 days out of the year, we're wearing black, we're crying, we're complaining about other people. We need to expand Azadari till it's, the whole year now all of a sudden. Like, that's not Islamic culture as well. The majority of our calendar are jashans and wiladat and happy occasions. It's a small amount of the year, which we should be engaging in Azadari, but it's not the bulk of our culture. And as many scholars, have pointed out, there's been a big shift in our culture, Islamic culture over the years, where we've shifted away from social programs, from spiritual growth, and now people have been stuck and constricted to crying and matam and majalis, and that's it. Let's just do that, let's cry, and then we'll go from there. Like, look, that's fine, and there's a place for that. But we have to make sure that we are taking the other parts of Islamic culture as well. Right? And these things we will see in the next point as well. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. No, you know what? I changed my mind. No, we'll leave that for tomorrow. I think I'll leave the next point for tomorrow. Yeah, I'll leave the next point for tomorrow because then it's going to go over time. Yeah. So inshallah, we'll continue with the story tomorrow night in our majlis then. I'll give a quick recap of the story and then the points that we went over, and then a few more points that we should go through. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We talk about the great personality of Rasulullah, the change that he was able to bring about in the hearts and the minds of the people of Hijaz. And how there were many individuals who were ready to die for him, out of love for him. Because he represented, Islam, he represented God's message. And people saw that in him. They saw perfection in him. And they wanted a part of that. Unfortunately, there were individuals of ill will who didn't care for the message. They didn't care for his personality. Whatever love was shown to them by Rasulullah, they didn't reciprocate it back to him. Every part of his being, they weren't able to learn from that. And they put up a facade in front of him. And then, of course, after his death, they completely flipped around the Islamic message. Before, you found companions who were ready to obey every single command of Rasulullah easily. When they would say, when he would tell them, we're going out to battle, without hesitation, they would leave their family behind and go out for jihad. But then you see at the end, when he asks for just a pen and a paper, they refuse. They say, no pen and paper. When he says, look, I've left behind a gift for my daughter Fatima, he said, no, we're going to take that away from you too. When he says, look, in order for the ummah to remain intact, in order for this deen to remain intact, you have to follow my wasi, my brother, Ali ibn Abi Talib. They say, no, you can take that back too. All of that deen, all of that wilayah was thrown back in his face. And so we remember in those last few moments of his life, they say, when he was in and out of consciousness, when these individuals who are power hungry, the munafiqeen who were nowhere to be found in these last moments, who were out securing their own power, we know that he was with his true closest companions and his friends. They say his head was in the lap of Ali. He was around Fatima and his other grandchildren. And at that point, the sickness had affected him where he was in and out of consciousness, right? He was sweating profusely, so they would come in, they'd check on him, he would wake up, he would look at who was around him, he would see what was going on, then he would faint again. And he would do this on and off. While the Ahlul Bayt were taking care of Rasulullah, when they realized that he's now in his final moments, that his soul would leave his body at any moment now. This is when he was spending his final moments with Fatima. And as Fatima was with Rasulullah, they say that there was a person who kept coming and knocking on the door of the house of the Ahlul Bayt. And Fatima would tell the person, Ya Rajul, oh man, please leave us alone now, right? The time for visitors is over with. Now it's just us. Let me be alone with my father. Let us be alone with our family, right? You've said your goodbyes, you've asked your du'as, that's enough. And the person would leave. Then a little while later, a knock would be heard again. And Fatima would try to tell them, please leave us in peace. Let us go and let us mourn our father in peace. Again, the person would knock and come back over and over again. And Fatima would had this look on her face. And when Rasulullah woke up and he regained consciousness, he looked up and he saw his daughter in this sad state. And every father's heart would break seeing his daughter and their daughter in that state. But of course, Rasulullah's heart broke when he saw that piece of him, which is Fatima. When he saw her in that state, he says, Ya Fatima, Ya Nura Aini. Oh my beloved, why are you in such a state? Who has made you feel like this? Why are you like this right now? He says, Baba, somebody keeps coming and knocking on the door. I keep having to send them away. We told them that we just want to spend our last moments, your last moments, just together with us as family. But they won't listen. They keep coming back. He says, Ya Fatima, if only you knew, this is not a human being who's coming and knocking on this door. This person, this individual, this being which is knocking on the door is not a human being at all. This individual comes to every single individual in their last moments and never ask for permission, even from other prophets. This is Malakul Maut, this is Israel, this is the angel of death coming and ready to take my soul away. And never, ever in the history of mankind has he ever come and asked for permission. But because of the maqam that you have, because of the status that you have, because of the respect that the malaika have for you, he keeps knocking first to make sure he has your permission before he enters this beloved household. We would say, Ya Rasulullah, Malakul Maut is knocking on the door before Fatima comes in. But Rasulullah, do you know, and of course you know, that in just a few short months, some other individuals, these same munafiqeen, will be at the door, screaming, begging, yelling, and telling Fatima to come out, telling Ali to come out. They won't be there asking for permission. They'll be there with whips. They'll be there with torches. They'll be there with ropes. They will break the door down on your daughter Fatima. They will make her lose her unborn son Muhsin. They will come and take your Ali. They will tie him in ropes and drag him through the streets. This is how your ummah will be treated after you go. ألا لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो. सारी दुनिया को वफादारी, सारी दुनिया को वफादारी सिखाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ. घर में है फातिमा ज़हरा के अंधेरा छाया, घर में है फातिमा ज़हरा के अंधेरा छाया. आज की रात चरागों को, आज की रात चरागों को बुझाओ लोगो, आओ ताबूत मोहम्मद का उठाओ 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 लोगो. अपने गम भूल के देती है खदीजा ये सदा, अपने गम भूल के देती है खदीजा ये सदा. آنسو زہرا کی یتیمی پہ، آنسو زہرا کی یتیمی پہ بہاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ 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 لوگو۔ غم میں مظلوم کے رونا ہے نبی کی سنت، غم میں مظلوم کے رونا ہے نبی کی سنت، یہ حقیقت نہ زمانے سے، یہ حقیقت نہ زمانے سے چھپاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ 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 لوگو۔ کیوں ہو خاموش بقیہ کے اجڑ جانے پر، کیوں ہو خاموش بقیہ کے اجڑ جانے پر، اپنے سرکار کو ایسے نہ، اپنے سرکار کو ایسے نہ رلاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ 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 لوگو۔ اپنے بابا کی جدائی میں جو چھپ کر روئے، اپنے بابا کی جدائی میں جو چھپ کر روئے، دل اسی فاطمہ زہرا کا، دل اسی فاطمہ زہرا کا بڑھاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ 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 لوگو۔ ساری دنیا کو وفاداری، ساری دنیا کو وفاداری سکھاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ لوگو، آؤ تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ لوگو، تابوت محمد کا اٹھاؤ لوگو۔ یا حسین 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 یا حسین، حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا، 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 آئے گی جب فاطمہ، آئے گی جب فاطمہ، حال پریشان دیکھنا، حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا
جاؤ زدار الوداعی ماتم
رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ
سینا سینا
روبرو بابا کے جب خاتون جنت آئے گی خالی جولی سرورے کونین کو دکھلائے گی بلیکی ٹھہرائے گا بلیکی ٹھہرائے گا محشر کا میدان دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا رکھ دیا برچی نے اکبر کا کلیجہ چیر کے رخ بدل ڈالے ہیں امت نے تیری تصویر کے مالک کوثر ذرا مالک کوثر ذرا امت کے احسان دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ
جاؤ زدار
حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا اصغر معصوم کے لب پر سوال آب ہے بوند پانی کے لیے وہ کس قدر بیتاب ہے نہر سے پانی نہیں نہر سے پانی نہیں دیتے مسلمان دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا زینب و کلثوم سے کہتا تھا شمر بد گوہر شام میں جاؤں گے ننگے سر پہ روں گی در بدر کربلا کے بعد اب کربلا کے بعد اب تاریخ زندہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا آئے گی جب فاطمہ آئے گی جب فاطمہ حال پریشان دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا حشر میں رنگ لائے گا خون شہیدہ دیکھنا
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا
یا
حسین
حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل رحم الله وعد الفاتحة.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum ya Bab. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum ya Bab Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn al-Amir al-Mu'mineen wa Ibn Sayyid al-Wasiyin. Assalamu alaikum ya Ibn Fatima Zahra Sayyidata Nisa al-Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Mawla wa Ibn Mawla. Assalamu alaikum ya Gharib al-Qurba. Assalamu alaikum ya Sultan al-Aban Hasan Ali ibn Musa Rida rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum ya Sahib al-Zaman. Assalamu alaikum ya Khalifat al-Rahman. Assalamu alaikum ya Sharik al-Quran. Assalamu alaikum ya Mawlana Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma kulli walika al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وتليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزق طوعا وتمثله فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على